Hi, it's Chloe McLeod, Advanced Sports Dietitian, co-owner of Health and Performance Collective and founder of the FODMAP Challenge. You're listening to the Physical Performance Podcast with Brad Beer.
Failure is not an option.
I've had my ups and my downs.
I think it's an absolutely breakthrough experience.
Welcome to the Physical Performance Show, the show designed to inspire the pursuit of your physical best performance. I'm your host, Brad Beer. Listen in as we delve into how the world's top physical performers achieve their success, as well as the highs, the lows, and the journey of getting there. Let's get ready, set, let's go. Welcome back to the Physical Performance Show, brought to you by PhysioCram and Pogo Physio. I'm Brad Beer, sports physiotherapist by trade and training and founder of Pogo Physio. Each week we'll aim to bring you a range of episodes, including expert editions, featured performers, coaches' corners, and interest editions. And on today's episode 174, I share with you a recent conversation that I had with advanced sports dietitian Chloe McLeod. We explore a topic that we are yet to dive into on the Physical Performance Show, and that is all things gut health. By way of bio, Chloe is an advanced sports dietitian. Chloe sits on the board for Sports Dietitians Australia. Chloe is the author of a recipe book, Anti-Inflammatory Eating, the founder of the FODMAP Challenge, co-owner of Health Performance Collective, and the Parramatta Eels Australian Rugby League team's sports dietitian. And on today's episode, we cover all things gut health, FODMAPs. That's right, you've probably heard the word, but perhaps you're curious what it is and what it means, why it's important for athletes and for those of us who are seeking to be at our physical best. We talk about anti-inflammatory foods, the role of pre- and probiotics in optimal health and performance, and we talk about food allergies and intolerances and just what is behind IBS, Irritable Bowel Syndrome. There's something in this episode for everyone, whether you're looking to perform at an elite level or just be your physical best. So here is my conversation, this expert edition, with advanced sports dietitian Chloe McLeod. Chloe McLeod, advanced sports dietitian. It is an absolute pleasure to invite you and have you onto the Physical Performance Show.
Thanks so much for having me today.
Chloe, to date, this show has featured experts, coaches, performers, and in some ways it's been neglectful to only have one other of your colleagues on to date, given how important today's topic is, and that was your colleague Andrew Hall. But Chloe, you're an advanced sports dietitian, been practicing for many years, working with some of the best. Can you put a little bit of perspective around your journey with your career to date, what you've done and how you got into it?
Yeah, for sure. And it's great to be the second dietitian on, and Andrew's absolutely fantastic. And for those listening, if you haven't listened to Andrew's episode, I would highly recommend you go back and listen to his as well, because it was a bit of a goodie. And hopefully you have some other dietitians on after me as well, Brad. So, but I guess just a little bit more about myself. As you said, it's been a little while. So I've been working as a dietitian for 10 years now, and for around 7 of those years I've been working with individuals in private practice, and a lot of that is athletes, going from weekend warrior style athletes right up to those in the elite levels of their sport. So these days I work mostly with triathletes, runners, and with rugby players as well. So working with the NRL. And I'm running two businesses, the Health and Performance Collective and the FODMAP Challenge, and it's lots of fun.
You have so many things going on. You've also outputted your book. Can you put a little bit of perspective around the Anti-Inflammatory Eating recipe book?
Yeah, so that came out probably about 3 years ago now, actually, and that came about because there was so much going on in the space with people talking about anti-inflammatory diets, and we thought that lots of people aren't really understanding what that is, and it's actually just a really healthy way of eating. Another name for it would be looking at Mediterranean style diet. So it's around education around how to help with reducing chronic inflammation in the body, and also how to follow a healthier diet, just using really simple, easy to create recipes.
Yeah, brilliant. And really that sort of segues into the theme of our discussion today, which is all things gut health. So this is a big topic, and certainly one that I'm interested to learn more about, as I know the listeners will be as well. So Chloe, just broadly speaking, can you tell us about what gut health is, and why is people out there trying to perform at our own best levels, whatever the endeavour, whatever the level of performance, why does this even matter?
Yeah, so I think the term gut health is it's pretty broad, and there's lots of ways that it's thrown about in the media and social media space. But when we're talking about gut health, essentially we're talking about the health of our digestive system, and in particular looking at our microbiome. So that's looking at within our digestive system, in our intestines, there's millions and millions and millions of different types of bacteria, fungi, archaea, so all these different organisms which all contribute to our microbiome. And having a healthy, diverse array of these can help with improving our health and our performance in a number of ways. It's been shown quite recently in research that it can actually impact sports performance, and we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail later on. But I guess my sort of key area of experience so far has been working with people with irritable bowel syndrome and looking at ways to manage that, and that sort of feeds into the runner's gut side of things and sports performance as well.
All right, so let's break it down then. No pun intended, Chloe. So gut health matters. It matters, you said, for health and performance, and really we can't pry the two apart, but if we just sort of, break it down in the sense of, talking about each area, on the health side of things, what is gut health, the health of our guts, which so then went on and said was the microbiome, what can that influence with our overall health, this our general well-being?
As I said, it's such a massive area, and I think the research has only scratched the absolute surface so far. But what's been shown so far is our microbiome, or our gut health, can impact our mental health. It can impact our weight or how much body fat we have. It can impact diabetes risk, can impact the risk of developing a number of other different chronic health conditions that are either directly related to the gut or not so directly related to the gut. So things like irritable bowel syndrome and other digestive conditions, right through potentially being influenced or potentially influencing a variety of different neurological conditions as well. So it's quite a broad spectrum of things that it seems that it may influence. As I said, though, there's so much more work to be done in the research space when it comes to gut health. I guess the key thing to be thinking about as healthy, active individuals is what can we do to help ourselves be our healthiest selves so that we can perform at our best, or if we're having some problems, what are some of the key small changes that we might be able to make to tweak our gut health so that, again, we can feel our best and perform at our best.
Well, I'm all ears, Chloe. I'm talking today with a sore throat, so maybe my gut's speaking to me here.
Potentially.
What can lead to poor gut health?
So if we're looking at things which are detrimental to our gut health, a few key things that I like to talk to people about. So number one is a lack of fibre. And I like to start with this despite it being sort of decidedly unsexy. When we think about fibre, it's often, think about fibre supplements or maybe finding it a little bit difficult to go to the bathroom. And yes, one of the key functions of fibre is to help with moving waste through our digestive tract so that we can easily go to the bathroom. However, fibre functions in a number of different ways. So we have insoluble fibre, soluble fibre, and then prebiotic fibres or resistant starches. And in particular, these prebiotic fibres and resistant starches, they ferment in our gut to produce compounds called short-chain fatty acids. And these short-chain fatty acids are a key part of how our gut is functioning. And influencing all of these other aspects of our health. And what's been shown is that most Australians don't consume enough fibre in general, and in particular our consumption of these resistant starches and prebiotic fibres is much too low. And as a result, this is potentially part of why we're getting some of the digestive problems that we're getting.
I mean, the next sort of question would be, is there a simple way for people to correct that?
100%. So number one is let's start to eat more plants. And so aiming for around 30 grams of fibre in general per day. And so some of the key source of fibres in our diet come from whole grains. So I'm not talking refined, poor quality carbohydrates. I'm talking carbohydrates that have been minimally processed. So things like quinoa, brown rice, also looking at things like sweet potato, so getting some of those starchy vegetables in. Barley is probably one of my favourite whole grains to recommend because it's so low GI, so it breaks down really slowly, and it's also a really rich source of the resistant starches, including legumes, so things like chickpeas and lentils and black beans in our diets as well. And then, of course, the fruits and vegetables are great sources of fibre as well.
So that simple moniker, eat more plants, even if we just have that in mind, we're probably moving towards a better fibre intake.
Yeah, exactly. And I heard something recently, a statement of the number one determinant of great gut health is eating a variety of different plants and incorporating that variety and having that diversity of plants in our diet. If we're achieving that, that's the number one predictor of if we're going to have a healthy gut or not. And I know we're going to get to the challenge a little bit later, but that may or may not link back into this.
Well, I just think as such a beautiful continuity, your physical challenge for the week, let's do a show first and let's issue that now. What's it going to be?
Yeah, so it's going to be aiming to eat 30 different plants in the week. This is what the research has actually shown is optimal for the best gut health. So what I'd recommend is count up across the week how many different plants you're consuming. Let's say you're getting 15 in at the moment. Why don't we then aim for 20? If you're getting 20, maybe we can aim for 25. But ideally, for the best health, we'll be getting a really great variety by having 30 different plants. And this isn't 30 different vegetables. This is vegetables, fruits, nuts, seeds, whole grains, legumes. So basically anything that's grown from the ground is what's considered a plant.
Anything grown from the ground. Okay, so I feel like emboldened in the pursuit of getting this physical challenge done, Chloe. So anything grown from the ground. Well, if we do take it on, we can let you know, and obviously we'll pop everything up at the end of the show. So thank you for issuing that physical challenge, Chloe. What else leads to poor gut health? So you've mentioned lack of fibre.
Yeah, so lack of fibre is the number one. Also, dehydration, I think, is a big one. And it's not uncommon for me to be chatting with clients and we work out that they're actually only consuming maybe, half a litre of water a day, and then maybe they have a coffee or two. Maybe they have a beer or a glass of wine with their dinner, and then that ends up being about all that they consume across the day. Now, consuming enough fluid across the day helps in so many different ways from a performance perspective. But if we're looking at our gut health, again, it helps with moving everything through. It helps to soften our stool. It helps to keep us really well hydrated so all of our body systems are working effectively. Amount to aim for varies. I will often recommend somewhere between 2 and 3 litres per day, depending on the individual. Just checking the colour of your urine is an easy place to start to check for hydration, but even so, the 2 to 3 litres is often going to hit the mark.
Yeah, brilliant. And what else? Is there anything else I imagine it's multifactorial, and so it's a relatively difficult question, but what else, Chloe, aside from dehydration, lack of fibre?
Yeah, so on top of those things, then also looking at overconsumption of highly processed foods, so refined sugars, like really saturated fats that are coming from processed foods. So things like biscuits, cakes, pies, those sort of commercially made baked goods are not so great for our gut health. Lots of animal products as well. There was a really interesting study that's come out that showed high consumption of animal products and low consumption of plant foods can actually significantly change the type of bacteria that are present in our gut. And if we're over consuming these animal foods and not having enough of the plants, plants that can have a quite detrimental impact as well.
Yeah, right. So it's probably no surprise there that these things don't do us any favours, but now we can all link it to gut health. Anything else, or are they the big trio?
That'd be the big three that I'd be looking at. So the big 3 or 4. So the fibre, the hydration, the lack of plants ties into that, but then the overconsumption of animal products and overconsumption of processed or refined foods as well.
Brilliant. We're talking about gut health, how this affects performance, how it affects health. Chloe, in terms of, you mentioned one of your special interest areas is working with irritable bowel, or IBS. Can you outline a little bit of what it is, the prevalence of this, why it matters to anyone out there trying to be their healthier selves or perform at their best?
Of course. So IBS is a functional gut disorder, and it is characterised by symptoms such as diarrhoea, bloating, gas. Sometimes people have constipation rather than the diarrhoea. Abdominal pain is another really common one as well. Often when you go to the bathroom, you might not actually feel like you've finished going as well. So all the things that are, perfect dinner table conversation, the next dinner party that you're having. But it actually affects between 10 and 20% of the Australian population, depending on which statistics you're reading. So it's quite prevalent in the population. So I like to think of it as if you're at that dinner party and there's 10 people there, then there's going to be at least 1, maybe 2 people in the room who actually have IBS.
Is it a fair read between the lines that the prevalence of this is increasing?
So it's an interesting one. So whether it's prevalence or whether it's more looking at just people's awareness that what the symptoms that they're experiencing aren't normal. It is certainly more common in females. It's more common in females particularly who are more likely to be a bit more stressed and anxious. So often in those sort of A-type personalities who are often interested in high-performance sport, it is really quite common. So I guess one of the reasons that I sort of got into the area through working with a lot of clients who are experiencing these problems. I think because people are starting to get more comfortable with talking about these, dinner table conversations, as I said, and I guess feeling a little bit more like, well, no, this isn't normal. What can I do to help it? And a little bit the same as talking about mental health as well. People are getting more comfortable talking about that too, and they do tend to tie in hand to a degree as well. We
talk about increase in incidence or prevalence of conditions, but there's also that, as you say, that greater talkability, acceptance culturally and societally. So IBS being one of these things, greater prevalence in women. Why is that?
I'm not really sure why, to be honest. I don't think that there's been too much done specifically in that space. I think maybe part of it is that women are more likely to seek help or to speak up when they are having these problems. There doesn't actually seem to be a specific gender difference. It's just that I think sometimes females are more likely to talk about if they are having these types of issues. That said, it'll be interesting to see if there is some different information that comes out in that space. I guess looking at what I sort of mentioned as well around like the stress side of things before as well. So stress and anxiety can often go hand in hand with IBS. So it's sometimes a bit of a chicken or the egg. And is it, are the symptoms being triggered because the individual is feeling stress and anxiety for whatever reason, or are they being triggered by food, or is it a bit of a combination of both? And outside of any sort of gender side of things, I think, that can happen to absolutely anybody, and it does.
Yeah, and we're talking about IBS, and I saw some information you posted, Chloe, on one of your channels, and it was breaking down IBS into some subtypes, C, D, M, and U. Can you speak to those subtypes?
Yeah, so IBS-C is constipation predominant, IBS-D is diarrhea predominant, IBS-M is the mixed types, so you're getting a bit of both, and U is sort of undecided, so it's all a little bit all over the place at this point. So you can sort of fall into any of those different subtype categories depending on what types of symptoms you're experiencing.
The other question I guess I'm thinking through is, how can it be diagnosed? Like, is there a formal criteria for people, or is it a bit more grey than that?
There is a formal criteria. It's called the Rome criteria, and that is how it is diagnosed. However, often it is a bit of a process of elimination as well. So it is always a good idea, if you are experiencing some of the symptoms that we've been speaking about, go and see your GP and get things checked out to ensure it's nothing more sinister. The last thing that you want is to miss that it is something more sinister, such as inflammatory bowel disease like Crohn's disease or ulcerative colitis, or even bowel cancer. So ruling those things out, ruling celiac disease out as well, prior to going and seeing your dietitian and starting to make dietary change, is absolutely essential, because you don't want to miss one of those things. I think that makes perfect sense.
And if you were working with someone that has had the other things ruled out in terms of diagnostics, like you mentioned,
yeah,
and so they're looking like they do suffer or experiencing IBS symptoms, general question, but how might you as a advanced sports dietitian start working with an individual like that?
There's a few things that we look at initially. So once those things have been rolled out and I'm starting to work with the individual, in the initial assessment, we'll have a look at what they're eating. And first step is to make sure that they're, in general, consuming a nice variety of different types of fibre across the day. They're well hydrated. Their diet's pretty good quality. So ruling out some of those triggers of poor gut health that we were talking about earlier on. So ensuring that the diet's not being filled with junk, so to speak, that there is a nice variety of vegetables, that they're getting the water and all that sort of stuff in. Now, if that's the case and they're ticking a lot of those boxes, then would start then looking most likely at what could the potential role of something called the low FODMAP diet be. And I'll go into that in just a second. If it is potentially one of those other things, first of all, we'll look at increasing fibre or potentially adjusting fibre intake, increasing hydration, improving diet quality. And then if that's not helping enough, then again, we might start to look at the low FODMAP diet.
Other nations, I've just come back from China and spent a few days there, and they eat a lot of plants. And it sounds a bit funny and crass, but I said to my wife, it's really funny, the flight with a lot of people flying out of China to Singapore smelt fine, but the flight going from Singapore to Australia didn't smell so fine. And Christine, my wife, laughed and she said it's probably their gut health because they're eating more plants. Is there any credibility to that very poor science?
So, I guess there's a couple of things to be thinking about there. First of all, it's totally normal to sometimes to feel a bit bloated. It's totally normal to pass wind. Like, if that's not happening, that's actually a problem in itself, and need to go see someone. But everyone should be, occasionally passing some wind and might feel a bit bloated after a large meal. Like, it's very normal. The smell can certainly change depending on what's being consumed, and if it is quite foul smelling, then I would be recommending to get that looked into, because maybe there is an imbalance happening in the gut, or maybe there is overconsumption of certain foods being consumed.
And this was a general cabin, I should point out too. This wasn't the N=1 experiment here.
Yeah. I'd be interested to know where all the people on the plane had been, and if they were just stopping over in Singapore, or if they if they had actually been staying in Singapore, because it's a very interesting thing to notice.
Well, I was just wondering if there was much data around other nations, and because culturally there's different eating habits for the West versus some of these other nations. But and Chloe, success rates, I mean, we're in clinical practice. I'm a physio, you're a dietitian. We both know that it's a funny thing to try and track, but are there people that, despite best efforts with, say, FODMAPs, which is where we want to land with this, that just still can't quite navigate and break through with this?
Yes and no. So if we're looking at FODMAPs itself, it will help around 70% of people who have IBS. There are a number of other things that have been shown to be really effective with assisting management of IBS as well, though. So it doesn't just come down to FODMAPs. So sometimes it might be some of the things I mentioned before around lack of fibre, or that diet's just a bit off track and it needs to be adjusted. Maybe it's more around the stress and anxiety side of things and that brain-gut connection that I mentioned before. And instead of looking at food adjustment, maybe instead there needs to be more of a focus on strategies of managing some of the other things that are going on. So whether that's working with a counsellor or a psychologist. I was just going to say there's some really interesting research around the role of hypnotherapy, so gut-focused hypnotherapy and IBS, and that actually can have similar percentage benefits as a low FODMAP diet can have for some people with IBS as well, so around that 70% marker. And then yoga can be fantastic too. So I know that people might go, what do you mean? But again, looking at that, I guess the relaxation that yoga can often result in, and then also that, I guess, some gentle massage of the different movements that you're getting with yoga. If you could see me at the moment, I'm like moving around. If you can imagine doing the different yoga poses, some of them can actually be a little bit more beneficial for IBS than others, but some really great stuff around that too. So FODMAPs is part of it, and then there's other potential dietary triggers as well that can be part of it too, but often it's looking at it as a more global approach and how is that brain-gut connection interacting? Is there different physical activity that could potentially help with managing symptoms as well?
You're listening to Advanced Sports Dietitian Chloe McLeod on this expert edition of the Physical Performance Show. Support for today's show comes from PhysioCreme. PhysioCreme is a topical massage cream containing natural plant-based ingredients, ideal for the temporary relief of muscular aches and pains. If you're conscious of what you put on your body, you'll be happy to know that PhysioCreme does not contain parabens or hydroxybenzoates, and its non-greasy formula doesn't leave any sticky residue behind. PhysioCreme can be found Australia-wide at your local Coles, chemist or health store, as well as their online shop. They've even offered a 20% discount to listeners of the Physical Performance Show. Simply use the coupon code POGO, P-O-G-O, when you shop at PhysioCreme, FISIOCREM.com.au to redeem this offer. Hurting Sucks and PhysioCreme have got your back. Support for today's show also comes lovingly from Pogo Physio. We exist to help you get back to your physical best following injury. We want everyone, that's right, everyone who walks through the doors of Pogo Physio to complete their rehabilitation, get back to their physical best, and in doing so, cross the physio finish line. Our philosophy is simple. We do not want to see you for a single session more than what you require or a single session less. We just want to ensure that you cross your physio finish line and get back to your physical best. To find out more about Pogo Physio's award-winning services, perhaps you're interstate or even overseas, where you can find out more about our telehealth services. Jump over to pogophysio.com.au where you can check out our award-winning blog or schedule your 1-hour initial appointment. For now, let's jump back on this expert edition with advanced sports dietitian Chloe McLeod on all things gut health for the athlete and performance. FODMAPs, it's an acronym. It
is an acronym.
Can you put us in the box seat here with, I think I've observed it popping up a lot more in recent times and even on, I think, some food packaging. So what is FODMAPs, Chloe, and why should we take notice?
Yes, so FODMAPs, as you said, is an acronym. It stands for fermentable oligosaccharides, disaccharides, monosaccharides, and polyols. And this is the exact reason there's an acronym, because that's obviously a bit of a mouthful. And these are different types of carbohydrates which are either not broken down properly or malabsorbed in the large intestine, and they can end up fermenting and causing overproduction of gas. They can cause that malabsorption, which can then result in diarrhea and the other symptoms of irritable bowel that we were speaking about before. Some of the most common foods that are rich in FODMAPs that are things that people eat every day, so things like onion, garlic, bread, milk, apples and pears, pasta is another common one, asparagus, beetroot. They're all common higher or high FODMAP foods. Now, I think it's really important to mention here that this doesn't mean that these foods are bad for you. They're all actually incredibly healthy foods. And being on a low FODMAP diet isn't a long-term management strategy. So, and this is something which I've been noticing quite a lot, particularly in the social media space recently, is that people go low FODMAP and then be like, great, I feel amazing, I'm never coming off this. And that is never what the low FODMAP diet was supposed to be about. It's a diagnostic tool to help to determine triggers of IBS. And then in most cases, most people won't react to all of the different types of FODMAPs. It might be one or two. Occasionally it will be all of them, but it's not usually the case. And if you're avoiding these foods long term, it can actually, again, change that gut microbiota. And because you're restricting potentially unnecessarily, that can add extra stress into your life. It can make social occasions more challenging. I could go on and on. But I guess the really key thing is that a lot of the high FODMAP foods are rich in prebiotics that I was talking about before. So one of those types of fibre. And it's been shown that restriction of the prebiotics, because of that alteration of the gut microbiota, is part of what can then potentially trigger further symptoms as well. So if you're never having something that you actually don't really have too much of a sensitivity to, you might actually find that you become more sensitive to it. So rather than avoiding long-term, never having it, it's about let's figure out which ones are triggers, and then let's actually reintroduce back into the diet. And it's not about reintroducing these foods back into the diet to the point that they're causing a problem. It's about reintroducing back to a point where you're able to tolerate them, and then hopefully over time we'll be able to build the intake of that up so that the diet becomes less and less restrictive over time.
But still leaving out some of those key triggers for long term, or everything should be able to be reintroduced once there's been an abstinence from it? Everything
should be able to be reintroduced to a point. So, and I think that's the really key part. So as an example, onion is a very common trigger that a lot of people are quite sensitive to. But it's not about I'm never going to eat onion ever again. And, particularly with something like onion, it can actually be pretty difficult to avoid, if we're honest as well, right? Like if we're eating out a lot, it never being in a meal, or never eat, if you're, at that dinner party that I keep referring back to, it might actually be in some of the foods. So rather than going, I've had a bad reaction, this is completely off my menu, let's work out where it is that onion can actually fit in. And so maybe you're not going to go and have a salad that's got sliced up red onion that's raw all the way through it. But maybe what you can tolerate is a little bit of onion that's been chopped up into big chunks in a stir fry or in a pasta sauce so you can see it. Maybe you pick that onion out and don't eat the actual pieces of the onion, but because a little bit of what's called the onion fructan has moved into the sauce, you are getting a little bit of that exposure. So you're not allergic to onion, because that's not what we're talking here. You're intolerant. So you will be able to tolerate a very small amount, or maybe you can tolerate a little bit more. So it's about working out where that balance sits for you, so that it just helps with reducing some of that fear around food. And I guess that's part of what I've started to see on social media particularly, is that there seems to be a bit of a fear for some people of reintroducing these things back in, and I think it's really important we start to address that.
Okay, so, a couple of things I've written down here to take away, Chloe. FODMAPs is a diagnostic tool to determine triggers for IBS. It's not a long-term sit and forget, strategy. And that you mentioned the word intolerance and allergies. So is there a difference between those two, intolerance and allergies?
Exactly. So there's a very big difference. So with an allergy, for example, somebody with celiac disease is allergic to gluten, so they cannot tolerate any amount of gluten. People who we hear about with anaphylaxis to peanuts, that's an allergy, so they cannot tolerate any amount of peanuts. Whereas with an intolerance, there is a level that can be tolerated. And I always like to imagine a limbo bar. So you remember playing limbo at school, where it's, you've got to go under the limbo bar?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So the more sensitive you are, the lower your limbo bar is to the ground, and the harder it is to get under it without knocking the bar. So the harder it is to have very much of that food without getting any symptoms. But that limbo bar is never going to be on the ground. There's always going to be a bit of room between the ground and the limbo bar. Like, there's always going to be a little bit of space, no matter how small of an amount. And I know for somebody, like, I'm sure that there's people who are listening with IBS who are going, but whenever I eat it, I end up getting symptoms and, I feel absolutely horrible. There's actually some information that's starting to come out that shows that people who have a little bit sometimes and push the boundaries a little bit more will actually do better long term from a sensitivity perspective than people who remove these whole food groups or whole foods entirely from their diets. So it's about having a small amount that's not going to cause huge amounts of pain or huge amounts of symptoms that end up being debilitating, because you've gone through this process to improve quality of life so that you feel better. So it's not about going back to what you were doing before, but it's about modifying things so that you're getting sort of the best of both worlds of having that variety, no matter how small some of that variety might be, but also not being plagued by these horrible symptoms that have been experienced previously.
Brilliant. And thanks for clarifying that, Chloe, the difference. In terms of, you've got some great content up on some of your channels. One that I saw, which we might pop up in the show notes, was low FODMAP swaps, blackberries to raspberries, pears to kiwi fruit, watermelon to pineapple, dried fruit, to grapes. So there's some great content you've got up, which we'll definitely want to point people towards.
Yeah, awesome.
Chloe, moving away from the FODMAPs space, something's popped up there that you mentioned, and that's pre and probiotics. I think a bit like FODMAPs, there's a growing awareness of these terms, but can you explain what the difference is and why, once again, these matter to health and to performance?
I think most people have probably heard of probiotics. So they are healthy bacteria of which are found in our gut. Most people have probably heard of probiotics as a supplement, and there's loads of different varieties of these on the market. Now, within our gut, there's billions of different strains of bacteria, and we don't even know what a lot of these are yet. There's certain key strains that have been identified, and these are some of the ones which are found in supplements, and they can have different roles. So some strains of probiotics might help, for example, with management of constipation. Some might help with helping eczema. Some of them might help with traveller's diarrhea, as an example. So these different strains seem to have different actions. So I think probiotics can be very helpful, but it's not a case of let's go grab a probiotic and everybody should be taking it. Because by eating probiotics, this will help to feed the healthy bacteria, of which there is a lot bigger diversity in our gut, and that's going to help with promoting the best health. So probiotics can certainly serve a place, and in somebody with IBS, I'll often recommend a probiotic. In some other instances, I will recommend it as well. Sometimes in like an athlete who's unwell, I would often recommend a probiotic as well. But it's not a let's take one every day and like life's grand. It doesn't quite work like that. Prebiotics, as I mentioned, are the healthy bacteria, the food for the healthy bacteria that are found in our gut. So they're sort of like the fertilizer, I guess. And they are these fibers that don't really break down. They do ferment, and they produce these short chain fatty acids that I mentioned earlier, which can have some really fantastic health benefits for us. A lot of high FODMAP foods are also rich in probiotics, and that's one of the reasons why we don't want to stay strictly low FODMAP long term. But like some of the other foods which are rich in probiotics as well are things like just right bananas, cooked and cooled pasta and potato. So when you're making a potato salad and it gets that sort of gluggy stuff at the bottom when you cool the potato down. If anyone's listening and knows that,
I have to confess, I don't, but I probably need to start making more potato salads by the sounds of it.
Yeah, so that gluggy stuff is actually the resistant starch or some of the prebiotic fibre, and it develops as the potato cools down, and the same thing happens with pasta. So you don't want to get rid of that gluggy stuff. You want to mix it back through and make sure that gets eaten, because that's like the best part from a gut health perspective. There's some different probiotic supplements on the market, and I think these can be a really useful way to help with getting a bit more of the probiotic fibre in our diets. And there's one that I really like that I do recommend quite regularly, but it's also not a replacement for that diverse array of 30 different plants in the week that we were talking about at the start.
FODMAP, so it can be rich in the pro or prebiotics. Which one was it?
The prebiotics.
Yeah,
so
prebiotics.
In these fermentable fibres. So, and that's part of what makes them high FODMAP. So, it's a funny thing in that we remove prebiotics to help with managing symptoms, but we know we need to be keeping them in the diet as well for best long-term gut health. So it is a bit of a fine balance, and I think that's why it's quite important to, if you are looking at manipulating your diet, to get a bit of help with it to make sure it's done correctly.
Got it. And from an athletic point of view, should athletes be doing anything to up their probiotic intake in any way? It's a broad question, I know.
Yeah, so I guess looking at probiotic-rich foods, so that's things like yogurts, sauerkraut, kimchi, kefir, kombucha. They're all foods which contain probiotics, not the prebiotics. Some of them have probiotics as well. And when we consume these, this is adding more of those healthy bacteria into our diets as well. And we know that particularly for the yogurt, the kefir and the sauerkraut, there's some really great health benefits to consuming those more often as well. And
a case study of myself here, Chloe, I was told to eat more, I can't do yogurt, right? And I was told to eat more sauerkraut, and I enthusiastically went off to the shop. I can't remember where I got it. I think a health food shop. And maybe a Chinese store, I can't recall, but supermarket. But I went home and opened the lid and thought, I'm never going to eat this. And I think it sat there for 6 months. I could revisit the experiment, but how would someone like myself get around that?
Yeah, so I think with something like sauerkraut, there's a couple of easy ways to incorporate it in. So say you're having a salad for lunch, just grabbing a tablespoon of it and mixing it through the salad, because then it actually will give a bit of a different flavour. And if you ever use any sort of vinegary-based dressings, it's going to give a similar sort of flavour as those vinegary-based dressings. So the easy way to do that. If you're having burgers or something like that, putting a little bit in your burger, say it's like a meat patty with your other salads and things in there, with your bun, some sauerkraut in there. Again, maybe that's instead of the pickle. That could work really well as well. They're probably the two main ways that I would be adding it in, but otherwise, like I've seen people adding it in just to sort of any sort of breakfast bowl that they might be having. I've seen it mixed in with some scrambled eggs before. Like there's loads of different ways you could incorporate it.
Brilliant. And Chloe, finally, so I'm rejuvenated to take that on. I'll let you know how I go.
Please do.
I will. Chloe, 2 lines of thinking finally. One, what are the best anti-inflammatory foods?
So I think, it's pretty clear from what we've been talking about today that eating a variety of plants is one of the best things that you can do from a gut health and an anti-inflammatory perspective. Outside of that, incorporating things like olive oil, nuts and seeds, fish, avocado, sort of those foods which are good sources of healthy fats as well, are great for inflammation. And then also incorporating a variety of different herbs and spices. So things like turmeric, ginger, rosemary, coriander, those sorts of things are also fantastic from an inflammation perspective as well.
You're listening to Chloe McLeod, Advanced Sports Dietitian, on this, an expert edition of the Physical Performance Show, on all things gut health for optimal health and performance. If you missed last week's episode 173, it was another expert edition with sports psychologist and author Dr. Joe Lukens. Here's a little snippet of what you missed.
I've got to say, I'm not a big fan of that term work-life balance or life balance, because I do think it's a myth. I think the idea that we can have all the little pockets of our lives and they're all balanced in a way that, everything works is a really nice idea. If you want to get to the pointy end of whatever it is that you're doing, it takes a fair bit of your time and a fair bit of your effort. So the notion that then everything else is going to balance out, it's far more of a theory than a practicality.
So if you missed Dr. Joe Lukens, be sure to jump over and enjoy the episode. And whilst there, peruse the archives of the show, expert editions, interest editions, coaches' corners, and featured performers dating right back to episode 1, featuring Ironman Surf Lifesaving Champion Ali Day. For now, let's return to this, an expert edition featuring Chloe McLeod, Advanced Sports Dietitian, on all things gut health, optimal health, and performance. Chloe, linking gut health to athletic performance, is there any research in this field, anything that, for someone that's maybe to date not sold on the importance of gut health, but their athletic performance matters, any research around that?
Yeah, there's so much that we could talk about in this space, and probably the most interesting area is around people doing Ironman events and marathon or ultra endurance events who are experiencing chronic digestive issues that only seem to come on when they're running or when they're participating in the event. And the reason for this is, there's a few different reasons for this, but when your body's under the stress of doing this training or doing the competition itself, blood is diverted away from your digestive system, and particularly if it's a really hot day, maybe it's somewhere that the air isn't quite as clean as what you might used to be breathing in, and maybe there's some other sort of more environmental stresses happening. These things can all actually cause your body to be able to less readily digest carbohydrates as they're consumed, and you might then experience runner's gut, which a lot of people have probably experienced who are listening previously, or if they are experiencing it now, it's something which we can certainly look at managing. I guess there's a few different strategies that I like to use when working with athletes who are experiencing this, and number one is looking at how much carbohydrate are they consuming during the training or during the event. How hydrated are they? What sort of temperatures are they training in, and are they able to replicate what their race is going to be like in any of their training sessions? And then also, what is their FODMAP intake? So I guess what I'm looking at there is, are they fueled up well enough? Are they hydrated enough? Is there any external things that could be influencing how they're feeling? And then is there anything else that we might be able to do to influence it? So to give you a sort of a bit of a case study example, a client of mine who is a quite experienced runner experiences digestive issues only when they are running. So there's like runner's gut could be a short, hard run. It could be one of their long runs. It could be in an event. The rest of the time, 100% zero issues. So what we've worked out is by reducing their FODMAP intake 24 hours prior to the race or to their run, this actually helps with improving the symptoms that they've been experiencing. And then around their running, we've rebuilt the FODMAP intake back in so that they're not being low FODMAP all the time, because obviously across a week that could be quite disastrous. So it's sort of taken a bit of a game of Tetris, if you like, but it's about manipulating intake at certain times so that those fermentable carbohydrates aren't being consumed before they go out for their session, and then they're consumed at other times. And then we've also ensured that adequate hydration, adequate fueling strategies during sessions which require fueling as well. And that's had a really significant positive impact on this individual's runner's gut, and they're getting some really good times, which is really nice to see. Fantastic.
And I think anyone that's competed in endurance sports with exertion for any period, as you say, has suffered from it at some point. It's just so common. Chloe, just finally, there's a lot of confusion. There seems to be anyway around fueling athletic performance. Some say low carb, high fat. Some say plant-based diet with moderate amounts of carbs and low saturated fats is the way to go. In the final moments, can you issue your very brief advice around this?
For sure. So I guess that it's not a straight answer to this question. So I'd be looking at what's the individual hoping to achieve. So if the individual's not pushing for pace, if they're just happy cruising along and not trying to get a podium or not trying to get a PB or anything like that, then a lower carbohydrate intake they should be able to, if they're fit enough, they should be able to participate in the event, but they're not going to be getting the best performance that they could possibly achieve from that, if that makes sense. So they could do it, but they could also do better if they consumed more carbohydrate at appropriate times. I'm not a fan of the let's just go entirely high carb either. I think it's more about periodizing or planning carbohydrate intake around particular training sessions so that we're able to get the best performance. So what I mean by that is if you're in like a lower training day or a lower period of training, then there'll be less carbohydrate consumed. If it's a really heavy training day or leading into a really heavy training day, then carbohydrate intake is likely to be a lot higher. So rather than it being it must be the same all the time, it's changing things up and adjusting it based on what the individual's needs are at that particular time.
And that certainly fits with the advice of your colleague Andrew as well, is customize it. It's not a blanket rule.
That's exactly right. And I think often as humans we sort of get in this mindset of it's more is better or less is better, and rather than it being something which is able to be customized or to be adjusted based on need. And if we're looking at someone who's looking for a PB and looking to get the best performance that they can, then we do know that consumption of carbohydrates, because they are able to be digested more quickly, you will be able to push harder and get some better times when you're using the carbohydrates as your fuel source. However, if you're, as I sort of said, if you're needing to just sort of cruise along and not get as great of a time, then the consumption isn't going to be as important. Also, doing some sessions fasted or with low carbohydrate availability is also very useful, because this helps the body to then use fat as a fuel source more effectively as well. And then it's about mixing things up so that we're able to get the best performance possible.
Fantastic. Chloe, we could speak for hours, and I know we haven't got that liberty. However, if you had to boil everything you've learnt to date, your career, which is outstanding to date, to one piece of advice in general to help listeners of this show perform at their physical best, what would it be?
I guess there's to build it all into one thing is probably challenging, but I guess a couple of really key things is, number one, be flexible and adaptable, because over time your individual needs might change, or whether that's due to what your physical needs are based on the training that you're doing or the life stage that you're at, and it's okay for things to change. So for an example, if you're somebody who's developed IBS, what your nutritional needs right now might be slightly different to what they were a couple of years ago, and then they're likely going to change again. So that's probably the first part, is be flexible and adaptable based on what your body requires. Eat plenty of plants, to come back to our challenge, and then being kind to yourself as well, in that it's not about being perfect, it's about let's get the best results that we possibly can, and make the best changes that we possibly can so that you are able to achieve the best performance.
How fantastic. Be flexible and adaptable, eat plants, and be kind to yourself. Chloe's top 3, we'll call it. Chloe, if we want to find out more about all the great things you're up to, where can we head? We'll tag all this up on the show notes, but what are your handles online, etc.?
Yeah, for sure. So my personal Instagram is Chloe_McLeod_dietitian. You can find the FODMAP challenge at the FODMAP challenge on Instagram as well. And the Health and Performance Collective is health_performance_collective. And I believe it's the same for all of those over onto Facebook as well. But yeah, if you head to Insta, you'll be able to find all 3 and find the others straight from there as well.
Fantastic. Chloe, you've shared so well today. Thank you for your time and your contribution, and all the best with the remainder of the year.
Thanks so much, Brad, and thanks so much for having me on the show. It's been lots of fun chatting to you.
So there you have it, another episode of the Physical Performance Show, and I hope and I trust that you enjoyed Chloe's sharings today. If you did, then please jump over and let Chloe know. You'll find Chloe over on Instagram at Chloe_McLeod, McLeod_Dietitian. From there, you'll also be able to hook up with Chloe's fantastic initiatives, including the FODMAP Challenge and also her Business Health Performance Collective. Please let Chloe know what it was that you took from the show, or consider snapping a podsy, which have been coming through thick and fast, and they are so much fun. That's simply a screenshot of what you're enjoying, which episode you're listening to, and tagging myself in at Brad_Beer or the Physical Performance Show at Physical Performance Show on Instagram. And feel free to include Chloe in there as well at Chloe_McLeod_Dietitian. Of course, you'll be able to find all links and other relevant resources relating to the topic over on the show notes at pogophysio.com.au. Massive thanks to those who have been rating and reviewing the show. The reviews really serve as fantastic feedback and encouragement to keep the show coming each and every week, so thank you. A huge thank you this week to show listener Alex Patana, who rated the show 5 stars, commenting so many golden nuggets. I stumbled upon this podcast a few months ago, and it's now become a staple of my weekly listening. I love the variety of guests and the engaging interview format. There are always so many golden nuggets of info in each episode, and I have to go back and listen when I'm not training or driving so I can take notes. Thanks so much for putting together a brilliant show. Alex, thank you for your support and for tuning in. It really does mean a lot. If you've been enjoying the show and you'd like to make sure the episodes land in your earbuds each and every week, then simply hit subscribe from within your favorite podcast player. That really is the best way to help the show grow and reach more people who, just like yourself, are looking to pursue and perform at their own physical best. As always, a huge thank you to the good folk who make this show possible each and every week. Daryl Misson, our audio engineer, Susan Wilkin, all things show administration, Matthew Olding, all things graphic design, and Oliver Crossley, all things behind the scenes assistance. Once again, a huge thank you to PhysioCrem for their generous support of today's show. Be sure to take advantage of the PhysioCrem offer, 20% off their online store. Jump over to PhysioCrem, FISIOCREM.com.au. As we say, podcasts are free to download and enjoy. However, they are not free to reduce. So once again, thank you, PhysioCrem. Now, coming up on next week's episode of the Physical Performance Show, we return to a featured performer episode. And I'll bring you a conversation that I recently had with Kiwi, New Zealand-based Ironman triathlon champion Braden Curry. I caught up with Braden in what is his lead up to the 2019 edition of the World Ironman Triathlon Championships held on the Big Island of Hawaii, Kona. As always, Braden, as a featured performer, shares with us the highs, the lows, and the learnings from his career to date. There's some great takeaways, which I know you'll really enjoy. Here's a little snippet of my conversation with Braden Curry, coming to you in full next week.
Obviously being in Noosa's guy JR here, who put together some pretty solid swim sets, so like a 7-odd-K swim set in the morning that would easily have some 10 400s followed by like 12 100s on 115, then jump out of the pool, have some lunch, into a 5-hour ride with the last 3 hours being at race pace, like Ironman intensity pace, and then off the bike into like 5 times 3K at sort of 3:30 pace, 3:40 pace.
So until next week, keep pursuing your physical best performance. I'm Brad Beer, and this has been the Physical Performance Show.